And it got more and more difficult as he moved with that army to New York and faced the worst and most difficult challenge of his career. In 1776, the British made their major attempt to defeat the American Revolution. They sent more strength in troops and in ships to America than at any other point in the course of the Revolutionary War. Half of the Royal Navy was sent into New York Harbor. 2/3 of the British Army was sent to New York. And these were very expert soldiers, very good at their jobs, with long experience. We've been in the records of their muster rolls in the British Public Record Office. And the average time of service for privates in the British Army was 9 years. 9 years. They enlisted for life. The average time of service for many of those American troops was less than 9 weeks. And there were even greater differences in the experience of the officers. And then after these British troops arrived, in what I think was the largest extension of seaborne power in modern history, after that, there was another army that arrived with their Hessians. It's possible to get into those records and to discover that the Hessians, who've had a very bad press historiographically, were in fact also highly skilled professional soldiers. Their officers were, I think, unique in the 18th century in that so many of them had been to university. They'd been trained in technical institutes. They took great pride in their service and in their soldiers' honor, and I found them in their records very different from the characters that we have met. And Washington met these men. He did not want to fight for New York. He thought it was indefensible, but the Continental Congress was micromanaging the war at that stage, and Washington was ordered to defend New York. The New England Yankees, who came down with Washington, thought it would be a much better idea to burn New York to the ground and abandon it. But this was also vetoed. And so a campaign followed, which was a disaster for American arms. Everything went wrong. Discipline collapsed, camp discipline in American armies. And the toll in illness and mortality was enormous. That in the Civil War, there was, for every combat death, there were 2 deaths by non-combat causes. In the American Revolution, in the American Army, it was 8-1, 8 non-combat deaths for everybody in battle. And Washington's army began to melt away. He lost control of momentum. The Howe brothers, who I think turned out to be much better soldiers, William Howe, a better soldier, and his brother, a better admiral than they've been made out to be, were very skillful in getting control of what in the Pentagon today is called the tempo of war. They could control the flow of events, and they took Washington by surprise again and again. First when they landed on Staten Island, then Long Island, then Manhattan, then up onto the mainland, and back to the Battle of Fort Washington, all in this period from midsummer to December of 1776. When it was all over, Washington was forced to retreat across the Hudson River. He'd started with an army of about 30,000 men, and as he retreated through Newark, he asked a young lieutenant of infantry, who was James Monroe, to stand by the side of the road and count his army. It had declined in numbers from 30,000 to 3,000 men. A large part of it was lost. It was lost at the siege of Fort Washington, just above what is now the George Washington Bridge on Manhattan. And Washington was standing on the Jersey Palisades as he watched those men being forced to surrender. And they also watched as some of them, under the 18th century laws of war, when one was fighting a rebel, a soldier could decide whether that rebel captive would live or die. And George Washington watched as his own men were put to the sword by their captors, some of them. And Washington, we are told, wept with tears of frustration, unable to do anything about this horrific sight that he was watching. And then he retreated across New Jersey, and as he went, the British followed at a distance. They didn't want to fight him again. They just wanted to get control of the countryside. And in the last weeks of November and in early December, they got control of large parts of 3 American colonies, New York, New Jersey, and also a good part of Rhode Island. And they issued an amnesty proclamation. General Howe sending it out in New Jersey, and something like 12% of the people of New Jersey signed that amnesty proclamation in November and December, often people who supported the Declaration of Independence. And many people thought that the American cause was broken, and it was only a matter of time before it would all be over. General Cornwallis packed his bags and prepared to go home, thinking that the war was over. George Washington wrote a letter to some of his relatives telling them to prepare to move west into the mountains because he thought that the cause might fail.